as every single one of you listening knows, regardless of your faith, your politics, your predisposition, your support of various candidates, every single one of you listening knows the left, whether you're on it or on the other side of it, the left hates Fox News. Every single one of you knows the left hates Fox News. And yet we've reached the bizarre moment of campaign 2024 where the left is curled up in the fetal position, clinging desperately to the Fox News poll, saying, "Help me, Fox News. You're my only hope," because the polling, a month after the verdict in the Trump trial, has shifted dramatically toward Donald Trump. It's remarkable. And the Supreme Court did not give the Biden team an abortion win at the Supreme Court. In fact, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously against states trying to ban the abortifacient drug, and also ruled largely unanimously that Idaho still has to perform emergency room abortions under federal law. Here's Chuck Todd on MSNBC.
There is a debate tomorrow where abortion is a huge issue in this country, and particularly for the Biden White House.
Well, in raw political terms, Chris, there are folks in the Biden campaign that were hoping for a different decision out of Idaho, right? They would never say it on the record because it puts people's lives at risk. But there was certainly, it certainly makes the case they want to make a lot cleaner and easier when it comes to judges and that issue.
So, yeah, the Biden administration didn't get what they wanted from the Supreme Court, and now they're running into, I mean, just listen to this. This is a roundtable discussion on NBC with a Detroit voter.
Who did you vote for in 2020? I voted for Biden. You regret that? In some ways, I do.
In some ways, I do regret voting for Joe Biden. This is where we are, but it gets worse. Larry Kudlow had on Jim Jordan on Fox Business. Listen to this about Washington Post polling.
Well, I got a great headline for you. I'm sure you saw it. Washington Post poll. Donald Trump stronger than Joe Biden on protecting democracy by 44 to 38%. No, 44 to 33% is what this is. So now that's very interesting because Mr. Biden says he's going to run on democracy. We're going to talk about January 6th and this and that. But, oh, wait a minute. Mr. Biden tried to keep Trump off the ballot in a couple of states. Mr. Biden, his lawfare doesn't seem to be working.
You know, the Democrats should pay attention when the Washington Post does this, except here's what the Democrats are doing. They're all outliers. They're all outliers. They're all outliers. They're all outliers. An outlier is a poll that deviates from all the other polls. And it's beginning to look like the Fox News poll might be the outlier. Let me give you the state of play. Emerson, Trump up 1. Yahoo News, Biden up 2. Daily Kos, which is a left-wing pollster, tied race. Reuters, Ipsos, Trump up 2. NPR, tied race. Fox News, Trump up 2. CBS News, Trump up 1. Morning Consult, tie. Quinnipiac, Trump up 4. And now the New York Times, the most accurate pollster of 2022. Trump up 4. You can say the polling is wrong, and I get it. Some of you email all the time and you get mad at me for talking about the polling. The polling's not news. But actually, it is news. It is news. The polling is news because it shapes the coverage of the race. You may not like that news organizations do polling, and you may not like that it shapes the coverage of the race, but it does, and you can't deny it. And also, when all of the polling charts in the same direction, that's a news story. Quinnipiac is known to have a Democrat bias. As I mentioned yesterday when the Quinnipiac poll came out, Democrats and Republicans alike perceive the Quinnipiac poll to have a 2 to 3 point bias towards the Democrats. It's always had it. It's the way they model it. Everyone knows when you get the Quinnipiac poll, add 2 points to the Republican side. And it's got Trump up 4. So it could be Trump up 6, which if you dive down into the New York Times poll, Quinnipiac is of registered voters, and it has Trump up 4. Among likely voters in the New York Times, it's got Trump up 4, but among registered voters, the New York Times has Trump up 6. Where the Quinnipiac poll would be if you gave Trump bias, it gave Trump 2 more points because of bias towards the Democrats. Now, what's so notable about this is you've got Nate Cohen out there now. He's the polling analyst for the New York Times. Trump's up 3 among likely voters. Trump's up 6 among registered voters in the new polling. He says, Real Clear Politics has it as up 4. He says up 3. But here's the thing. Nate Cohen is having to call his poll an outlier. Why? Because the left is wrapping itself in the Fox News poll. The Fox News poll is one of only 2 polls that shows Biden with a lead. Even the left-wing Daily Kos has Donald Trump in the lead. So the left is, help me, Fox News, you're my only hope. And Nate Cohen's got to write a piece that says, yeah, our poll could be an outlier. About every 20th poll that a pollster conducts lies outside the field. Why? Because you're using random samples. Every single pollster gets an outlier. An outlier, they're difficult, but they're inevitable. Let me just read you for this. Historically, outliers are less accurate when judged against final election results, but they spark a media frenzy as well. When outlier results come around, it's better to look at the average of polls. As it happens, we released our poll average on Monday, and Mr. Trump is ahead by 1 over Joe Biden in the poll average. Outliers are bound to happen. Just as you can flip a coin heads 5 or 6 times in a row simply by chance, you can survey 1,200 people and end up with 30 more Trump voters than you'd get over the longer run simply by chance. That kind of error is inevitable. It happens once every 20 times in polling, and coincidentally, this is our 20th poll of the election year. But there's a reason for that. Typically, it's Democrats who want to talk to the pollster more than Republicans. But after Donald Trump's conviction in New York, Republicans became 17% likelier to respond to the survey. It's actually the first time in the New York Times seeing a poll that Republicans were more likely to respond than Democrats. Democrats want everyone to know they hate the SOB. After the Trump verdict, Republicans want to talk to every pollster and say, I'm still with that SOB. The verdict did not fire up the left. The conviction of Donald Trump in New York City by a partisan Democratic judge and a partisan Democratic prosecutor fired up the Republican base and a handful of independents for Donald Trump. But there's something else. There's something else. I got to read this for you. Nate Cohen has the audacity to write this. Sometimes outliers are right. Yes, outliers are less likely to be accurate. Yes, they might simply be off by chance, but they might also reflect a new shift in the race that other pollsters haven't reported yet. They might reflect something novel and correct about a survey's methodology, and the average of other polls might not be as trustworthy as it looks. What if other pollsters found something surprising as well, but then made tweaks to bring the results into line with the consensus? That's called herding. What if other pollsters with similar results just didn't publish their results? It's happened before. And while outliers are less likely to be accurate, the most valuable poll of all is the outlier that's right. Looking back, the Times Siena poll has a record of publishing outliers that prove to be accurate. When a final Times Siena poll differs from the average of other polls by at least 4 points, the Times Siena poll has actually beaten the average of the rest in 8 of 9 outliers. That doesn't include the Kansas survey he had written about earlier, because there were no other public polls in the race. But in the Kansas survey, the New York Times was perceived as having an outlier race that showed a Democrat winning by 12 points in a district Joe Biden had run by 4 points. Everybody dismissed the New York Times poll, and the woman wound up winning by 10 points. In other words, when the New York Times see in a poll has an outlier, everyone should pay attention, and it has freaked out the left. The talking point from the Democrats, is it changing? This is Biden's campaign spokesman with Dana Perino on Fox News.
Well, no, listen, I think what the state of polling speaks to is the fact that this is going to be an incredibly close and competitive presidential election, the way that all modern presidential elections are, right? We know 2016 was incredibly close. 2020 was incredibly close. This is going to come down to tens of thousands of votes in a handful of states. And so that's why tonight is an opportunity for President Biden to communicate directly to those voters that are going to decide this election. And tonight he's going to present a clear choice between himself, who's fighting for the American people every single day, and he's going to be debating against Donald Trump, who's now running his campaign as a convicted felon who's fighting for himself. That's going to be the fundamental choice that we present on the debate stage tonight.
You're going to make it all about he's a convicted felon. Donald Trump's going to make it about illegal immigration and inflation. What do you think is going to be more persuasive to people? We have the polling. We know where it stands on the issue of the convicted felon charge. We have the polling. We know where it stands on inflation. We know where it stands on immigration, and those outweigh the convicted felon charge. It's remarkable that the Biden administration has hammered out their case. The theory of the race is that democracy's under attack and Donald Trump's a convicted felon, and no one is buying it. And you've got multiple media profiles now telling the Biden administration, you need to change, you need to change, you need to change, you need to change, you need to change. And the Biden administration is digging in their heels saying, no, he's a convicted felon and a threat to democracy. That's our message. Oh, by the way, we're talking about the economy. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about the economy. But he's a convicted felon. You're not talking about the economy. You're talking down to people on the economy. This isn't playing well. So now, here's the punchline of all of this for you. The odds. Former DeSantis campaign pollster Ryan Tyson has a bunch of swing state polling showing not only is President Trump still edging out Joe Biden on the ballot in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin, he's expanded his lead in 4 of those 5 states. And the odds makers, The Economist, now gives Trump a 71% chance of winning. Nate Silver gives Trump a 66% chance of winning. Jack Kersling, a pollster, gives Donald Trump a 64% chance of winning. Decision Desk HQ gives Trump a 56% chance of winning. 538, Nate Silver's old shop, gives it a 50-50 chance of winning. And then Poly Markets, where you can bet on the markets, and people do, Trump has a 60% chance of winning. What's so notable is that many of these, including The Economist and Nate Silver, they give Donald Trump the odds of winning the majority of the popular vote as well. Something a Republican hasn't done since 2004. The Democrats have made a fundamental mistake in this race. They let Joe Biden convince himself to have a second term, and then they let him muddle through convincing himself democracy's under attack is the winning message. Joe Biden is a man who has been wrong about everything for 50 years, and everyone knows it. To think he could be right about this defies the odds, and the odds are now playing in Donald Trump's favor as a result.